Advanced TV Herstory, the podcast that brings you fresh perspective on the importance of TV in our lives. We tell stories of leadership, persistence, and achievement of TV women, because in the lives of women, no other media platform has influenced or inspired so many. Lo, these 60 years. Women of all ages have been impacted by what they've seen and will see on TV. So join us for a little advanced TV herstory by streaming it directly on our website, tvherstory.com, or anywhere you find podcasts. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Hey, TV Herstorians. You know, sometimes a single 22-minute episode that has sat in relative obscurity, well, sometimes it can say a lot. So in this installment of Advanced TV Herstory, we're going to take a focused look at how TV once addressed workplace sexual harassment and a little bit of context around what that word even meant when the original series episode aired. What I'm talking about is a creepy episode of That Girl, but it is in fact a really valuable, watchable lesson in how far we've come in 50 years, and maybe in your own life, how to start even more conversations that lead to cultural change, permanent cultural change. And listeners, you know that an in-depth, fact-filled review on just all the ways that girl changed the television landscape is why I podcast. So it aired from 1966 to 1971. Those were really big years. And let me tell you, it broke through the glass ceiling and it stayed there. And when I say that it stayed there, think about that. Think about like a shattered piece of glass, and there is Marlo Thomas and this merry band of her father's cronies writing that were putting their heads through and willing to accept whatever scrapes or criticisms came as a result of being in that situation for 5 years, somewhat alone. The cultural landscape of the 60s, that change was happening at such a breakneck speed. And as you watch the series, which we'll talk about in another episode, it really documents what that transition might have looked like. And I say that word might deliberately because That Girl and its force, Marlo Thomas, is in fact a reflection of the time, the emerging women's movement, the feminism, the civil rights, the breaking everything that was. But it is only in as much as there were many more men, white men, writing for that series than there were women. But the consistent presence of women writers who were in those That Girl writers' rooms would go on a few years later to pretty much own the backstory of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. So there's no question that Girl really does have a place in TV herstory. It's an important series that will require a lot of research, however, and I'm hoping some really great accounts, reflections, and context from its makers, firsthand accounts, fan scholars, women who felt represented by this very important series. And you should know or be reminded, though, of a few things about That Girl before we actually talk about this one episode. That there are, in fact, 137 episodes. That first, it was placed in the hands of Marlo Thomas by her father, Danny Thomas, who was at that time a well-known, well-respected comedian. He was a producer, a director, and he was an emerging philanthropist. His creative work is known for its quality and its humility. He was out of that, kind of vaudeville comedy club circuit, but he's also known for founding the St. Jude Children's Hospital, which Marlo has gone on to do tremendous work for. Now get this, and this is a head spinner. Marlo Thomas is now 81 years old. 81. In 1966, she was 29. So when the show began, she was 29. When this episode aired, she was likely 30. And she played Anne Marie, who was probably supposed to be more in her early 20s, but it's okay because remember that America at that time had seen so few young women on TV and so few fancy New York young women that it really didn't matter what the age differential was. It was all believable because it was so foreign. And by being Danny Thomas's daughter, however, Marlo was in, or is in, a class of a second generation of entertainment royalty that really has capitalized and carried forward the opportunities to do good, to understand the power of the medium of entertainment. And this class, a few names that I'll mention, really they rose to the pressure. They rose to finding excellence in performance in the family business. So these others include Candace Bergen, who is the daughter of ventriloquist Edgar Bergen, and Liza Minnelli, who is Judy Garland's eldest child, and both are 71 this year. So they are 10 years behind that girl. They were 18 when that girl premiered. Isn't that just fascinating? Isn't it really, really important to realize that this one series had such an impact on every woman performer, writer, director, anybody who ever wanted to do anything on TV or to write or to just be independent. Others in that class include Michael Douglas, who is the son of Kirk Douglas. He's 72. Think of his tremendous body of work. And then, of course, film legend Henry Fonda had 2 kids who went into the business. Peter and Jane are respectively 78 and 80. So think about it. When marketing and ad execs, kind of like the Mad Men, could see the impact of the baby boom's numbers, they were out there. There was no question that this was a large generation of young people, that when it was suggested, well, hey, let's have a women-centric show, and Danny Thomas and his guys are backing it, it didn't seem like a huge risk, right? Second, another really important thing. So you have the fact that Marlo Thomas kind of comes from this very credible, established network of entertainers, writers, producers. They could deliver anything. So second, it set the stage, however, 1966, in many ways, for the series that would share the same lineup with it, no question, teeing up Julia, which starred Diane Carroll. Julia was a single Black mother. She was a working woman. She was a nurse. She was widowed from the Vietnam War. Everything was very, very gradual. This was nothing that was going to upset families watching this stuff on TV, white families in particular, because that's all that they could see from Fifth Avenue, from Park Avenue, from the decision-making boardrooms in New York and LA. First you had that girl, then you had Julia, and then only briefly did that girl and the Mary Tyler Moore Show actually overlap. So think about it, listeners. As much as we like to watch these shows through our 2018 lenses on our big flat screen TVs, you know what? It doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel the same as watching it in a smaller TV in a time that was different, in a time that was less sophisticated. But instead, we need to think about the fact that these were stories and representations that were meant to entertain that whole family during the early evening hours. And so the sense that change and transition could only happen gradually, it starts to make sense. We are still impatient because it feels like the change has been too gradual, but this is where it started. And so let's get the most out of watching these series even today for what they are. And that is that they were the only women-centric sitcoms, largely, in a very large TV lineup of men. There were others that tried. Betty White had a number of different series. There were lots of other series. I'm not trying to say that this is the only one. However, going for 5 years with a very highly visible lead actress who was also the producer, this one just carries more clout and was also preserved and has aired in syndication pretty much consistently since it went off the air. So let's watch this series for what it is, not what it isn't. Which brings me to the third point, and the one that belongs to this episode of That Girl. And you know, if I single out a single episode for a discussion, it's because it really remains seminal in some way to feminism, to TV herstory, to how it is that we see culture through TV, women's culture in particular. So in the first season of That Girl, the whole season is just sheer novelty. It is eye candy that just is nonstop. From the telephones to the artwork to the paneling in offices to the entire wardrobe of Marlo Thomas, it is a feast for the eyes. Marlo Thomas is incredibly charming. And the hunky Ted Bessel, who played her boyfriend, Donald Hollinger, they are such a pair. They were such a 60s pair. And she lived alone in New York, which is fascinating in its own right, but her protective parents lived only a train ride away. So it really was okay for the whole family to watch this. In this period in U.S. history, power was shifting. It was shifting in the economy and in politics and in the classroom. And so that girl really does represent this gentle effort to help facilitate a peaceful transition of power. And I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek because ultimately most of these episodes are written by white guys, so they were controlling the flow of transition. Season 1, episode 24, late in the first season. It's a breakthrough hit. Everybody's loving that girl. February 1967. And it's called A Tenor's Loving Care, written by Joseph Bonaducci with Carroll O'Connor, who just a few years later would create his role as Archie Bunker. Now, remember that part of the novelty of that girl, different from what you might have been seeing on TV if you lived in Nebraska or Minnesota or Nevada. Anne Marie is an actress and a model living in New York, living this fantasy life most American women just simply found to be a wonderful escape. And Donald Hollinger is this incredibly liberated guy. It's 1967, and he's a woman's man, but he's a guy's guy. And he's a reporter. And so she occasionally helped him get the story that he needed. And that is pretty much the flow of many of the episodes. But this one starts off with her standing in line nearby Donald. He's in this bigger gaggle of men, reporters, trying to get an interview or a glimpse of Carroll O'Connor's character. And Carroll O'Connor's character is this world-renowned Italian opera singer. Now, in 1967, 1966 American speak, Italian and opera singer might be code word for womanizer. Might be. So the episode starts with Donald there in the lineup, and all of these men want this chance to interview the opera singer. And Anne is just standing there looking perky, and she's the only woman in the hallway, and she's wearing something that is very different. She just presents different because that's what different is, right? And the opera singer, Carroll O'Connor, comes out and says, "I will only grant one reporter, one interview, and I want that girl." And he points at Anne Marie. Only he said it in Italian, which today is a pretty clever riff of the gimmick that they used the entire series, and that is that the opening bit ends with the words, "that girl." So it's very clever. It's very fun. And I think they had a ball putting the amount of effort into it that it required to have every opening bit end with "that girl." That sets the story arc. And so Donald originally really, really did not want to send his girl into the arms of this lech simply for a scoop, simply for a coveted interview. And Anne tries to assure him that they would go together to get the interview, that Donald will go as a photographer. They actually get in the door as a pair, but the opera dude kicks Donald out. And Anne tries to get the interview going, and it's all kind of, you could get the tension, the comedic tension that's trying to develop here. And ultimately, the Italian opera singer invites Anne back to his room for after the performance for that exclusive interview. We can all see the handwriting on the wall. Donald and Anne address this sexual harassment likelihood rather collaboratively. Both think she's at risk. He's protective, as a man would be in 1967. She defers to his judgment, which a woman might do in 1967. But the stakes get raised when Donald's boss is thrilled to learn that Donald has landed this exclusive. All of a sudden, it's not something they can walk away from. So Donald revisits the premise of Anne going alone, though this time she'll carry a tape recorder in her bag. So the stage is set. Donald accompanies Anne, but waits in the hallway. Marlo Thomas's dress is a spectacular tribute to the 60s. Anne and the tenor are alone in his room. She's trying to get the story. He's being, lech. A primetime 1967 lech. After a little running around the room, being chased around the room, she concocts the perfect diversion to get out unscathed, and it works. There's clearly no interview involved in this evening. And ultimately, Donald is granted an exclusive interview with considerations. So, what prompted the change of heart by the tenor?
As soon as he's over his cold. Yes, sir. You just keep that music page open. Right, thank you. Bye-bye. Honey, it's too much. He not only believed you had a cold, he believes he caught it from you.
See what the power of belief can do?
Yeah. Yeah, but what I still don't understand is why did he get so nice to me all of a sudden? I'm getting the interview plus pictures.
Plus tickets to all of his performances here.
Yeah. Yeah, how come?
I just don't understand it. All I did was call him up on the phone and just mention that I had the tape recorder going all the time that he was chasing me around the room. And just like that, he offers me all these tickets.
Uh-huh. There's a word for that.
Freebies?
Blackmail.
Oh, Donald, I figured as long as he was being generous, he might as well be generous to you, too, and give you the story.
Shame on you, holding a tape recorder over a guy's head. A recording we've already erased.
I know that. And you know that. But does he know that?
Okay, you're thinking, and by the way, you can watch this episode online at metv.com. It's also on disc 5 in the season 1 DVD of the series That Girl. So you're thinking, wow, oh my gosh, this is real. This is even still today. I'm just listening to this. Donald knew all along, and he had these strong vibes. Donald, the boyfriend. He wasn't a total jerk about it. He knew she could handle the situation. And hey, in the end, Donald's career gets the bump because he gets the interview, and his boss is none the wiser as to how it came about. But are you thinking what I thought when I first saw this? This is the one line. This was the one scene that made me realize we needed to talk about this on Advanced TV Herstory. My thought is, would a woman have written that ending differently than a man, or am I just expecting too much? So listeners, it's important to know that workplace policies and federal laws about sexual harassment did not exist in 1967. This is situational equivalent of flashlights and duct tape, really understanding in a dashboard of sorts what the impact of Anne and Donald's making a bigger deal out of it would have meant to either one of their careers, which led to obvious conditioning that continues into today's understanding of power in the workplace. But in 1967, sexual harassment really didn't exist as policy, as law. There was nothing to back anybody up making such a claim. Or even in 1971, by the time that girl signed off and placed the feminist working girl baton in Mary Richards' hands. Now, one resource you can find, and just to get a better handle on what this all means, is that Time magazine, in an article leading up to the 25th anniversary of Anita Hill's powerful testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Time magazine published an informative history of sexual harassment laws and court decisions which have shaped workplace culture today. If you have any interest in the workplace sexual harassment movement, sometimes called #MeToo, it's really important that when we are managing this across many generations, and older feminists see it perhaps one way and younger feminists see it another way, we also have to remember that what we are talking about is change over the course of time. And as much as we are impatient for more change to happen, and we are on the cusp of it, I believe, in 1967 and 1971, it was a very different world. So to better understand where Anne Marie and Donald Hollinger were sitting in this approach to steering clear of a lechy tenor, and for Donald to even compare leveraging this knowledge and calling it blackmail, well, here's how Time magazine describes how the modern timeline of sexual harassment policy starts. Quote, "The phrase sexual harassment was coined in 1975 by a group of women at Cornell University. A former employee of the university, Carmita Wood, filed a claim for unemployment benefits after she resigned from her job due to unwanted touching from her supervisor." Pretty clear cut, right? So if that's the start of even the phrase sexual harassment, 1975, you can see that 8 years prior, Anne was out on her own, and Donald was doing his best to probably just get through the situation. But at least he was on her side. They knew what they were dealing with. And so kudos to that girl and to the producers and the directors and the writers for even bringing this subject forward. It's just sad that it had to happen with a laugh track. Which sort of brings me to the point that there's a lot to absorb in every episode of That Girl. And when you do, pay attention to the writer credit, which often comes at the beginning, because women who went on to mold Mary Richards sharpened their pencils with Anne-Marie. And you can definitely see the difference. You can feel the difference in an episode written by men versus one written by women. So it's fascinating. Now, certainly 6 seasons of a successful show gave Marlo Thomas credibility and experience to become a major influencer in all sorts of social change and relevant causes. While I dig into the research and review what's been said and written about the series, its creation and its impact, and place it in the context of where we are today, what we know, and how this series can actually better inform us and make us better agents of change, I ask that you go ahead and watch a few episodes, including this one from season 1, episode 24, A Tenor's Loving Care. They will appear on your TV if you have access to MeTV, online at metv.com, or go out and buy the DVD. There are 5 seasons of the 6 seasons on DVD. Discuss these episodes with older women in your life. It's sure to raise some memories. That would be a fascinating conversation. If you have that opportunity and something fun or real or important to this older woman in your life comes from that conversation, I would love to hear that story. Because listeners, this show grows on the feedback from you all and the good work of a team that is out to improve what we're doing, how to make it more relevant, and how it can better inform this important conversation about social change, sexual harassment, and how women should be handling it, and how men should be handling it. So a big thank you to Jen Eads, who is the sound technician who makes the quality of this audio as good as we possibly can make it. And she's an incredible podcast resource with brassybroadcast.com. And Catherine Yang, who is the brains behind our YouTube channel. Yes, a podcast has a YouTube channel, which I will tell you how to access in a moment. Music you hear peppered throughout this and most episodes of Advanced TV Herstory is Take Me Higher by Jazzer, which is found at freemusicarchive.org. Learn more about the history of sexual harassment from the great 2016 Time magazine article by Sascha Cohen. There is a link in our show notes to that article, and if you just can't wait for us to cover That Girl as a series, as promised, do check out Marlo Thomas's 2010 memoir, and she's written a couple books, Growing Up Laughing, My Story and the Story of Funny. 2010 Marlo Thomas, Growing Up Laughing, My Story and the Story of Funny. And Stephen Cole has written the seminal book on the series, and it's called That Book About That Girl. Now, how do you send us all of this good stuff? How do you share your stories? How do you share your memories? Or, in fact, jaw-dropping awe of the fashion that went into That Girl? Go ahead and hunt us down on Instagram at Advanced TV Herstory. On Twitter, you'll find us at TV Herstory. We have a Facebook page, Advanced TV Herstory, a podcast, and a YouTube channel, which is starting to be populated not only by episodes of this podcast, which can just be pulled up on YouTube and press play, but also more video that has me explaining a little bit more of the backstory of the podcast, bringing fresh information forward, some fresh context, perspective, all that fun stuff. So you just get to see me is all. Lastly, you can send us an email, throw in that anecdote from the conversation you had to advancedtvherstory, all one word, at gmail.com. Go to our website where these episodes can be played directly off of our player. You can also find scripts and other notes and a way to access our Patreon account. So go to tvherstory.com and on the homepage, scroll down to the bottom where it says Become a Patron. To become a patron of a podcast means that you're recognizing value, that you know that somebody has to at least pay for there to be a quality experience here. So at this point, the costs that go into it are the hosting service, Libsyn, audio editing that is done professionally and well done, and the continued subscriptions and services that go about to make an independent podcast as widely distributed as it can be. If you join others in supporting this work, I am hugely grateful. One such subscriber, one such patron is Rochelle, who just told me she believes in supporting the good work of others. Finally, find this podcast as a stream. Just go ahead and press play or download at Apple Podcast, at Radio Public, at Google Podcast, Google Player. Most places where you find podcasts, you're going to find Advanced TV Herstory. Because talking about TV women and great stories and important stories like sexual harassment in the workplace and where it was in 1967 and what we're doing today, it all matters. And that's why I podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.